I read another book. Okay, who's tired of the applause? Not me. Um, yeah, so I read another book. I actually finished this book a while ago. When did I finish this book? Probably like a month ago. Maybe not. Okay, anyways, I finished this book a while ago, but I haven't talked about it yet. And I don't know why, but now that the sun's in Aries, I feel like doing a bunch of things. So let's talk about this book. This book, I feel like the angle's a little too. That feels better. Okay, so the book I read is called Drunkard's Walk by Frederick Pohl. And it's a short book. It's 140 something pages, so I think it's technically a novella, if I'm remembering correctly. I think those are like under 150 pages. I might be wrong, but anyways. Well, actually, it calls it a novel, but it doesn't really matter. It's a science fiction novel, which is very different from the first two books that I read um, in this series of I read a book. It's a science fiction novel, and it tells the story of this mathematics professor who keeps trying to kill himself, but not intentionally. Like he's not conscious while he's doing it, and so we're basically trying to figure out why. And so yeah, I'm gonna share my thoughts. It's not a book review, just my thoughts, some quotes that stood out to me, other things. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first thing I wrote down was Drunkard's Walk, wanting to die and not knowing why. So when I first started this book, I didn't really get that he didn't want to kill himself. He had like no idea that he was even like doing it. Um, I thought it was more so like not knowing why you feel that way. So this is what I wrote. I wrote that we don't know death, but we do know life. And we know that sometimes life sucks. It hurts. It's sad. And when it feels like too much, we wish it would just stop. Anxiety, depression, overwhelm, racing thoughts. We think we'd be better off dead, because at least then there'd be no thoughts in our head. But it turns out he's not suicidal at all, actually. But anyways, let's see. Um, the next thing I wrote is this book is good. The cliffhangers at the end of the chapters are juicy. And I will say it's a good book. The beginning is really good and the end is really good. The middle section though was a little bit more difficult to get through just because it feels like nothing's really happening until things start really speeding up at the end, and it's like boom 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 and then it's over. Um yeah, okay. Let's see. Oh, I also wrote down, because this book was written in 1960, I believe. Um, but it's set to take place in, I think, the year 2096. Let me check. No, 2196. So even further in the future from now. Um, and it's actually kind of really interesting how he imagines this future, because most of the story takes place on a university, and people are kind of like born into the university. Most people that attend the university grew up in the university, like in the university, like town complex thing. Um, and it's really interesting because it's sort of like limits and restricts education, and there's sort of this like elitism when it comes to education. Um, but it's interesting because like they actually like they broadcast the lessons. So people that live in these things called Texases, which are sort of like offshore communities that like they're like fishing communities, and they're sort of like a lower class of citizen. They're less educated. They do the jobs that like other people don't want to do, like separate fish body parts and stuff like that. Um, where was I going with this? Well, so yeah, there's like this separation of society, and they call them like townies versus gownies. So like people who grew up in the town versus people who grew up wearing gowns, I guess. Um, like well dressed, well fed, other things. But anyways, like this kind of like made me think about Commander in Chief, motherfucker, and cuts to the Department of Education, and wanting to make it so that only the rich can be educated. Um, yeah. Anyways, whatever. Um, okay, but the reason I brought up that this book was written in 1960 is because he uses words and also uses words differently. Okay, he uses words that I have never heard of, never used, but also uses words differently and spelled differently on occasion. So I wrote down words that I didn't know the meaning of, and also words that were used or spelt differently, just because I thought it was interesting. So the first word I wrote down was rejoinder, Rejoinder. Didn't know what that meant, but it's a sharp or witty reply. Um, and the next word he used was feckless, and I didn't know what that meant. And I thought it was like similar to reckless because it sounds similar, and kind of, but it means lacking initiative or strength of character. Um, so it's almost like lazily. Um, okay, and then so later in the book, we learn that the main character, his name is Cornet. Corn, it's like spelled like corn nut, um, which is silly. Also, okay, another thing. This is, it says, so biting funny and so sharply satirical. And I don't know if that's just because it was more relevant at the time or something, but I didn't really find it very funny, especially because it's like talking about suicide. Um, like I got some of the satirical aspects, and I'll get into some of them later, but I didn't really think it was that funny. I don't know. But anyways, we learn. Sorry, this is so disjointed. We learn that the main character is not the only one who's been having suicide attempts, and apparently there's like 10 others, or like some number of others, um, on the university campus that have tried to commit suicide, and none of them have made it past 10 attempts. Um, so I wrote down suicide epidemic, and I remember seeing a TikTok video, honestly, a while ago, from Amani Barberin. Username is Crutches and Spice, who's a disability advocate, and they were talking about suicide and how I don't know if it was 2024. It might have even been earlier than that, but it was like it was the year with the most suicides. Um, and yeah, I wrote down suicide epidemic. Like I think it's also has to do with like loneliness and how isolated our country is, um, and also our world, but specifically our country, it isolates us. And so people feel like they have no one to turn to. And they should be able to, you know, do all this, get through all of it themselves. And that results in people, you know, not knowing what to do and taking their own lives, which is really sad. And there's this hawk circling outside the window. Anyways, I wrote down this quote. It says, you can die, you cannot stop." And I thought this was really interesting because we often see death as the end, um, but really death is just a new beginning. It makes me think of the death card in the tarot, um, because the death card is not the last card in the deck, and it's not even the last card of the major arcana. Um, and so some keywords that have come to be associated with death are change or rebirth. Um, because with every death, there is a new birth, a new beginning. Um, and it also made me think of, you know, I say this like all the time, just because I don't know. But energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only transformed. So even when we die, our energy that makes us up doesn't just disappear. It gets transformed into other things. So you can die, but you cannot stop. And also, like, even when you die, your memory still lives on. Um, and the things you have changed in the world will continue to be changed, you know? Um, the next thing I wrote down, I don't even know why I wrote this down, but I think it was just like an interesting turn of phrase. It said the beginning of hope, and I don't really remember the context, and I didn't write down the page number, so good job on my part. Um, but I thought it was interesting because it was like you're you're not really hopeful yet, but there's the beginning of hope. There's like the inkling that you might have hope in the future. Um, I thought that was interesting. And I also wrote down this Latin phrase, and I think I forgot to look it up because I have no idea what this means. It's jus prime noctis. Um, Noctis looks like night to me. Prime, maybe like before. I don't know. Like if I were to just take a guess, I would say like just before nighttime, but I don't think that's what that means. Maybe I'll look it up here. Jus prime noctus. Let's see. The internet connection's not great, so let's see if it gets. Okay, while this loads, I'll look at my next quote. Oh, this is a okay. Okay, so the first thing that came up is the AI thing. So I don't tend to trust the AI because um, AI doesn't know shit. Okay, I don't trust AI. Let's see. Oh God. Right of the first night. Okay, so jus is like the law or the right. Um, and then it's coming up with this like French thing saying droit du Seigneur, which is the right of the Lord, and this is also known as jus prime noctis. Um, and it was a supposed legal right in medieval Europe, um, allowing feudal lords to have sexual relations. Give me 1 second. It's not loading. Um, with any female subject, particularly on her wedding night. Weird. Don't know if this came up in the context. So the character, the main character, the math teacher, does end up marrying one of his students, which is kind of crazy. And like to think about happening now, like we would be so like, um, you know, like that's not right. Like that's really weird. And in the book, he's like one of the youngest teachers. I guess he was like really smart, so he's like 30 something, and maybe she's 22. So like there's like a 10-year difference. Um, but even just that student teacher like dynamic is like really like something we would frown upon in today's society. But it's like it's almost like there's no, it's not even thought about. Like it's just normal in the book. Um, so yeah, I don't really know why I wrote down this Jus Prime Noctis, but anyways, I think it's just I wrote it down because I didn't know what it meant. But yeah, a right consummating a marriage granted to someone other than the bridegroom by the law or custom of some cultures. Okay, that's really weird because that didn't really happen in the book. No one was doing that. But okay, let me move on because this next one kind of makes me sad. And so throughout the book, they talk about math and science, and use it to like apply to broader things in terms of society and the ongoings of the book. And so on page 61, they wrote, "The rights of the higher displaced the rights of the lower, as an atom of fluorine will drive out oxygen of a compound. But should it be that way? It was that way, if that was an answer." I feel like this still applies. The rights or the, well, yeah, the rights of the higher. And when I hear that, I think of like people with more money, the higher class. Those displace, they come before and they push out of the way of the rights of the lower class. And I actually saw another TikTok. It was a Harvard Law graduate, and it was talking about how in a freshman year class of law school, 80% of the students wanted to go into public interest, but by the time they graduate law school, only 20% still want to go into public interest. Um, and it's because corporate law pays 3 times higher than, public interest or, you know, not working for corporate law. Um, and then I think I also saw another TikTok talking about how the court system, the way that it's working now, is really just favoring the rich. And so it's like it's not really a justice system. It's not about justice. It's about protecting those with money, those in power. And then I also thought about like the police and how there was this protest. I'm seeing like a lot of the things that go on in my mind are just things I've seen on TikTok. There's this video of Kiki Palmer at a protest during like the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, and she's talking to like these police officers, or they might even be like state or like um, military personnel, and like they have their guns and all this stuff. And she asked them to walk with them, to walk with the protest to protect the protesters. Um, and then in that video, he says, "Well, we have to protect the businesses." And so it shows like the police, they're marketed as these people to keep the public safe, but all they really do is protect the interests of, they protect monetary interests, they protect capital. Um, so basically, fuck capitalism. Yeah, that's the whole message of my entire life. um, but then that's the last part. It says, it was that way. If that was, it says, but should it be that way? It was that way if that was an answer. Like, yeah, it is that way. That doesn't mean it's right, but that's the way that it is. And so we have to deal with it being that way. Ugh, and that sucks. It really sucks. Um, yeah. Anyways, that video I was talking about that like mentioned the Kiki Palmer um, at the protest, it was part of a bigger video, and it was talking about how liberalism um, can like crush revolution in like a matter of seconds. And it was a really good video. I'm going to see if I can link it in the description of this video. It's a TikTok video. I think I can find it. I will try to, because it was really interesting. In a matter of like 37 seconds, the whole like revolutionary act of trying to get the police to protect the protesters rather than the businesses was, you know, shut down in like 30 seconds because the request was changed to have the police officers take a knee. And it was kind of like very like literal, and like it was like, don't they say like there's like an expression like you're bending to the will, or like you're bending a knee to something. Like them taking a knee did nothing. Like the police officers taking a knee, what did that change? That didn't help the cause at all. But because of like liberalism being like a pervasive like ideology, they saw that as revolutionary. Oh my gosh, the police officers took a knee. And so what? Like they're still out here killing people left and right. Okay, anyways, let me move on. I'm getting a little too political in this novel, the science fiction novel. Um, let's see. Okay, on page 79, he says in a sentence that something had proved, and I always thought it was like the past participle of prove was proven, like this had proven that. But he uses this had proved that. And I just thought that was interesting. Um, and then I wrote, this is spoiler alert. Um, bro, they shot Master Carl to death. So Master Carl is another character in the book. He's sort of the math professor that's, I guess, sort of like the boss and also the mentor of the main character. And he gets shot, and it's like very suspicious circumstances. They said he was trying to kill someone else, and I was like, I'm not really buying that. Why would he try to kill the president of the university? Um, and then it later gets revealed that like, no, It was a lie. They killed him because he knew too much, and we'll get to what he knew in a second. But I want to talk a little bit about the writing of this book. I really liked his writing style, the way he wrote, like the way he uses words, not necessarily how well he tells the story, but the way he describes things and yeah. Because I do have sort of some qualms with how little happens like in the middle section of this book. But on page 84, he writes, he didn't notice she was there. He would have noticed if she were missing. And I really like this. He does this a couple times. Let's see if I wrote down again. Yeah, on page 120, he says, he saw all of them. He saw none of them. And I really like it because he's directly contradicting himself. But in the context of what's going on, you can understand how it kind of makes sense. Like, he didn't notice that she was there, but if she were missing, he would have noticed because he had, like, he's talking about the wife, and so he had that, like, attachment, that feeling, that connection. And so when you're with that, you feel normal. So you don't notice that it's there. It's not like, oh, wow, there's this thing. But then if it were missing, you would notice because it's like, oh, I don't feel normal anymore. Um, yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I liked that sort of contradictive, you know, saying one thing and then immediately following it up with a contradictory statement, but not having it be confusing. Very much Zero Zombie Zebras, very much Duality of Man. Go watch my video on Zero Zombie Zebras. Um, Another thing you wrote here, he talks about moronic, incompetent bureaucracy. And I just thought that was like a funny phrase, and it's something we have a lot of in the world. Okay. Page 99. Failing to end his life, the main character. That destroyer inside himself was trying to end the part of his life that had suddenly grown to mean the most to him. And he's talking about his relationship with the wife. And I thought that was really interesting. It's like sometimes when we feel like we're not good enough, we will start subconsciously sabotaging things in order to prove that narrative to ourselves. And so this comes up a lot in RuPaul's Drag Race. And RuPaul calls it the inner saboteur. And it's basically the part of yourself that is purposely doing things poorly, or you're convincing yourself that you're going to be bad, so then it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you end up doing poorly. Yeah, and I just thought that was interesting. Okay, I wrote down this word, pelagic. Not sure if that's how you say it, but that means relating to the sea, specifically the open sea. And I don't remember the context it was used, but that's a new word. Page 102. A muted muttering of music. I love alliteration, so I just wanted to write that down. Page 104. This is interesting. It's just, and the character's just saying goodbye, but he wrote goodbye as GOOD dash BY. And I was like, that's really weird. I did not know that was how they wrote goodbye. Or maybe it's not, but like that's how he wrote it in this book. And then I looked up why we even say goodbye? Like, what does that even mean? What is bye? And what's good about it? It actually came from a phrase, God be with ye, which is interesting because in Spanish, you say adios, which is, Dios is God. In French, adieu. Adieu. I don't know why I tried to make it French. Like to God or with God. And so, yeah, like I didn't realize that when we're saying goodbye, we're saying God be with you. And I don't know, I just thought that was like interesting. And so I guess that's why he wrote it this way, because it used to be like it was God be with ye, but they like shortened it so it was like God BWYE. We. And so that turned into goodbye. Um, but so good isn't really good, it's God. Um, so there's nothing good about the bye. It's just God is with you. Um, okay. Oh, this part really made me sad. So basically, what's happening now in the book is there's basically a pandemic, and millions of people are dying of this random illness. And so I was like, wow, this is kind of crazy. Um, Suicide epidemic, pandemic, and then later on there's going to be like natural disasters and like fires and riots and all these things. And I'm like, wow, crazy. Like life really never changes. Like even though this book was written in the 60s, the same shit is always happening, always. Um, anyways, so this this comes from a section of the book where this um, TV broadcaster, he wants to stop broadcasting, business as usual, the normal programs, because millions of people are dying. And so this is what he says to the boss. He says, "Sir, there are millions sick, maybe dying." And the boss says, "That leaves a lot who aren't." And it just showed like the stark reality of life. Like it doesn't matter if millions of people are dying because there's millions of other people who they can still profit off of. Um, and it was just really sad. Okay, and I wrote here page 134, paragraph 4. So I'm just going to find that. I guess I'll read it to you. Page 134. Oh, very close to the end of the book. So I know some of this is kind of confusing because you don't really know what's going on, but I promise I will explain sort of what happens at the end because I have to kind of explain it in order to talk about some things that I want to talk about. So sorry if you're like lost and this is not great. But anyways, paragraph 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I guess I'll just actually explain it right now because it talks about what's going on. So basically, there's this group of immortals, right? And they've been living for a really long time. So they're like hundreds of years old. And they actually started this pandemic. They brought these indigenous people from some random place and infected them with diseases and brought them to a bunch of locations so that they would infect a lot of people and kill them because the immortals. So we find out at the end of the book that the immortals are not special. Everybody is actually evolving to be immortal. And so eventually they were not going to be the only immortals. And they did not like that. They did not like having to compete with other people. So they were like, let's just kill them off. And they're actually not even immortal. They're not. They can live indefinitely, but they're not. Unable to be killed. Because some of them will eventually be killed. So the paragraph says, Cornut, the main character, Cornut knew that that was what the immortals wanted. They had to keep their herd of contented, helpless, short-lived cattle long enough. The herd had prospered until it competed with its unseen owners for food and space. Like any good husbandman, the immortals had decided to thin out the herd. That was fucking crazy. That was like, holy shit, is this what the fucking billionaires are trying to do? They're trying to hoard even more wealth so that they don't have to compete with the mere peasants of the world. And so, yeah, I like really, when I was reading this book, I was like, wow, this is really crazy because this is sort of what is going on with the ruling class in present day and like how far they're willing to take it. And it's really scary. Um, yeah. Okay. So then I wrote here, I just finished Drunkard's Walk. And wow. So they end up realizing that the 75 immortals were not that special, and that the whole human race would eventually evolve to be that way. And I wrote, we will all live like billionaires one day when they fly a little too close to the sun. And so another thing that happens in this book is that the immortals, once like the whole pandemic's going on, there's like fires and protests and people getting killed left and right, they hide. They go to their little place far away from everybody else on this like remote island where they have like slaves and like it's crazy. And that made me think about the billionaires buying bunkers. Specifically, Mark Zuckerberg has this like 5,000 square foot bunker underneath his house in Hawaii. Very, very colonizery. And I'm like, what do these billionaires think? Like, they know that they can't do what they want to do without, people rising up and trying to go after them. So they know they have to have a game plan to hide and wait out the storm, essentially, because that's what these immortals were trying to do. They were going to just like wait out until most of the population was dead so they could just go and live life lavishly or whatever. And I really don't want that future. I don't want these billionaires with bunkers to be able to just wait out while we all fight each other because there's no food left or something like that, And that's a really scary thing, but I don't see that as like an impossibility. And that's what's really scary about the politics of the world right now. Yeah. Okay. So I wrote, I wasn't quite sure what to expect after reading the first chapter of this book. We're introduced to the protagonist, a 30-year-old mathematics teacher who keeps attempting suicide despite not wanting to die. And I wrote that the last few paragraphs of the first chapter really hooked me in and left me wanting more of the writing style. And so I want to read the last part of the first chapter because it's really well written. So it says, so this is after we see this man try to kill himself. So it says, suppose you are a picture on his wall, perhaps the portrait of Leibniz, taken from Ficque's old engraving. Out of the eyes under your great curled wig, you see this young man stand up and walk slowly toward his window. His room is 18 stories up. If a picture on the wall can remember, you remember that this is not the first time. If a picture on the wall can know things, you know that he has tried to leap out of that window before, and he is about to try again. He is trying to kill himself. He has tried 9 times in the past 50 days. If a picture on a wall can regret, you regret this. It is a terrible waste for this man to keep trying to kill himself, since he does not want to die at all. I messed up that. He does not want at all to die. But, yeah. It's a really good book, actually. I really liked it. And I want to read, I have another book by Frederick Pohl, so I'm going to read that eventually. Maybe after I finish this next book that I'm reading. Yesterday I cried. But yeah, so here's some things I want to touch upon. I already touched on the suicide epidemic, but I want to touch upon how people don't actually want to die. They just don't know what else to do. Um, oh, yes. And so it turns out he was being mind controlled by these immortals because they have this ability to telepathy, to communicate without saying anything. And so they were trying to get him to kill himself because I guess they didn't want to just kill him. I don't really know. Um, and I want to talk about the nefarious ruling class, weaponizing fear, using disease to wipe out populations. Using disease to wipe out populations. Where has that been used before? Yeah, the genocide of the indigenous Americans. The indigenous people of the not Americas, because they were not America before the fucking colonizers came. So I liked the commentary on society, the satire, and I liked the characters. They were pretty well developed. I actually cared about them. I didn't like the pacing. Um, okay, yeah, that's all I have to say about this book. I liked it. I didn't like that the middle was kind of boring, but I think the story makes up for it because it's really good. And it's like, damn, we really we gotta do something about this whole ruling class bullshit. Um, but yeah, thanks for watching. I think this was kind of long. Yeah, bye.